Caribbean Sea, October 27, 1962. At 200 meters below the surface, the ocean was black, motionless, and heavy. The water devoured everything: light, sound, time. In that crushing silence, a Soviet vessel slid slowly through the warm currents, invisible to the world above. The submarine B-59 had been hidden beneath the Caribbean for 5 days. Inside, the heat surpassed 40 degrees. The air was thick, saturated with carbon dioxide, and sweat dripped down the metal walls as if the ship were breathing. The men slept on the floor, half naked, taking turns to approach the fans that barely worked. The electric reactors had been shut down to avoid detection. The generators were almost spent. The batteries were at their limit. There had been no communication with Moscow for more than a week. No one knew whether the war had begun. Commander Valentin Savitsky moved among the shadows of the control compartment, tense, silent. In front of him, his second-in-command, Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov, watched the sonar indicators. Each pulse returned a different echo: enemy ships, destroyers, propellers. Above their heads, the United States Navy was hunting them. Suddenly, the submarine shuddered. A distant roar rolled along the hull, followed by a deep vibration, then another and another. Depth charges. The Americans did not know that this submarine carried a nuclear torpedo on board. The crew trembled. The metallic noise bounced through the compartments. Some men made the sign of the cross, others clenched their fists. The commander turned to his second-in-command. "The Americans are attacking us, Comrade Captain." Arkhipov did not take his eyes off the panel. His voice was low, almost a sigh. "Not yet." Silence returned, as dense as the water surrounding them. Only the dying hum of the ventilation system and the steady pulse of the sonar could be heard. No one knew it, but that day was the high point of the Cuban Missile Crisis. On the surface, Washington and Moscow exchanged threats. In the oceans, dozens of United States ships formed a ring to blockade the island. And in the deepest part of the sea, a single submarine, without contact with its country, had the power to destroy an entire fleet. The air inside B-59 was so thick that voices slowed down. Some sailors began to hallucinate from lack of oxygen. The lights flickered. Captain Savitsky paced back and forth, his face covered in sweat, while the sonar's echo sounded like an hourglass counting the seconds to catastrophe. Arkhipov, the only man on the ship who had previously seen a reactor collapse and a crew die, knew they were about to make the same mistake he had witnessed years earlier on K-19. "Not yet," he repeated to himself, barely audible. At that instant, hundreds of meters above them, the surface of the sea boiled with warning explosions. Each one could be misinterpreted as a real attack. Each one could be the eve of spark that ended the world. The Soviet submarine B-59 floated on the knife edge of history, and inside it, a single man was about to make a decision that would save all humanity. In a world on the brink of the end, a single man chose not to press the button. In October of 1962, the entire planet hung suspended over an invisible line. Never before had humanity been so close to its own destruction. The Cold War had reached its boiling point. For more than a decade, the United States and the Soviet Union had measured their power in missiles, armies, and words. But that autumn, the words ran out. On both sides of the ocean, leaders found themselves trapped in a spiral of fear that none could stop. It all began with a balancing act. The United States had deployed Jupiter missiles in Turkey, only a few hundred kilometers from Soviet borders. They were medium-range nuclear weapons, capable of reaching Moscow in less than 15 minutes. For the Kremlin, it was an intolerable provocation. Nikita Khrushchev, determined to restore balance, responded in secret and kind. He ordered ballistic missiles installed in Cuba, only 150 kilometers from Florida's shores. It was a brilliant and suicidal move at once, an attempt to match forces by placing the threat directly before the enemy. On October 14th, an American U-2 spy plane photographed the launch silos under construction. The images were clear and devastating. President John F. Kennedy immediately convened his crisis cabinet. In less than 24 hours, the world found itself split between two options: surrender or burn. Kennedy chose a third, a naval blockade. The United States deployed a line of warships around the island, preventing any Soviet ship from entering. The White House called it a quarantine. The Kremlin called it an act of war. As the United States fleet closed in on Cuba, military analysts knew that a single spark could ignite the apocalypse. A collision, a misread signal, a miscalculation. Any of those could unleash the nuclear war everyone feared. In Moscow, the response was immediate. The Northern Fleet received orders to send submarines to the Caribbean to escort Soviet freighters carrying supplies and protect them from the blockade. They were conventional submarines, but each carried a tactical nuclear bomb, a 10-kiloton torpedo, authorized for use if attacked. Among those submarines was B-59, commanded by Captain Valentin Savitsky, with Vasily Arkhipov as his second-in-command. Both set sail without knowing they were about to be trapped at the most dangerous point in modern history. The voyage began under simple orders: do not fire unless attacked. But thousands of kilometers away, the definition of attack was becoming more and more confused. Communication with Moscow would be cut off shortly after departure. From then on, the men of B-59 would sail alone, under a sea that would soon become the quietest battlefield of all time. On the surface, leaders spoke of diplomacy. Under the sea, the fate of the world was being decided in silence. B-59 left the port of Murmansk at the beginning of October of 1962. No one on the pier really knew where they were headed. The orders were sealed and could only be opened on the high seas. The crew, 75 men, believed they were heading to a routine exercise in the Atlantic. But once the submarine crossed the Arctic Circle, Captain Valentin Savitsky gathered his officers. He opened the envelope bearing the seal of the Soviet General Staff. Inside, there was a single instruction: defend the Cuban mission. If you are attacked, respond with a nuclear torpedo. Silence was immediate. Each man understood the weight of those words. They did not carry a simple weapon. They carried the end of the world. For the first few days, the sea was calm. The submarine advanced slowly south, submerged, keeping the radio off to avoid being located. But as they approached the Caribbean, conditions began to deteriorate. The temperatures inside the hull exceeded 45 degrees. The air became unbearable. Fresh water was scarce. The men rationed it in sips. The batteries were at the limit and ventilation was reduced to a minimum. The smell of fuel, sweat, and rusted metal permeated every corner. Time warped. Day and night lost meaning. The body clock faded into the darkness. Some sailors began to talk in their sleep. Others argued over small things: a shift, a piece of bread, a misinterpreted word. In the command compartment, Vasily Arkhipov watched in silence. He was a man with a serene face, restrained in his movements, but beneath that calm lay years of invisible wounds. He was one of the few survivors of the K-19 submarine disaster, which had occurred barely a year before. In July of 1961, he had watched a faulty reactor release radiation inside the hull, and half his crew die between screams and silence. He had seen heroism confused with horror, and he had learned that at sea, human errors are not corrected. They are buried. That memory weighed on his shoulders as he watched his men struggle against heat and despair. He knew that the line between discipline and madness was as thin as the steel of the hull that separated them from the ocean. Communication with Moscow was interrupted a few days after departure. Encrypted messages did not arrive. Attempts to transmit were blocked by interference. The men of B-59 did not know whether their country was still at peace or whether the war had already begun. Each distant explosion on the sonar could be a sign of the end. Each United States depth charge, a possible start of the apocalypse. On lightless nights, Captain Savitsky walked the corridors, exhausted, his mind on the brink of collapse. Arkhipov followed him, maintaining the calm his commander needed to see, even though he himself felt fear rising up his throat. One night, in the nuclear torpedo compartment, Savitsky spoke without looking at him. "We will not survive if we fire," Arkhipov answered slowly, his voice hoarse. "And if we do not fire, perhaps we will not either." The sea around them was an invisible monster, the air inside the ship, another enemy, and the silence, a sentence. Each meter they descended took them a little further from the known world. Each passing hour brought them closer to the point where human reason had to confront the instinct for destruction. B-59 sank into the darkness of the Caribbean, and with it, all humanity hung by a thread. On October 24, 1962, the United States fleet had closed its ring around Cuba. On the surface, aircraft carriers and destroyers formed a barrier of steel and radar that stretched across the Caribbean. Beneath that invisible wall, 4 Soviet submarines tried to cross it. One of them was B-59. The heat inside the submarine had become unbearable. Humidity soaked the uniforms, electrical equipment failed, the batteries were on the verge of exhaustion. And then, the Americans found it. The destroyer USS Beale, followed by USS Coney and USS Nicholson, detected a rhythmic sound on passive sonar, a metallic, regular, deep beat, the sound of Soviet propellers. The operators listened carefully and confirmed the acoustic signature. They had located an enemy submarine. The American ships activated the identification protocol. They could not destroy it. The order was not to open fire, but they had to force it to surface. They began to launch warning depth charges, explosives calibrated to detonate near the target without damaging it. From the surface, they seemed like simple bursts in the water. From inside B-59, they were earthquakes. The hull trembled with each detonation. The lights flickered. The men clung to tubes and consoles, their ears ringing from the pressure. The air became denser, hotter. Some shouted orders, others prayed. External communications were cut. The radio received no response. No one on the submarine knew whether Moscow still stood or whether the world had already been devastated. The Americans, they believed, had begun the war. Captain Valentin Savitsky paced the control room like a cornered animal. He had gone hours without sleep, his face covered in sweat, his eyes sunken. Each explosion was one more confirmation that his mission had ended. He slammed the panel with his fist. "They are attacking us," he shouted. "We are going to die, but we will set them ablaze first." The words fell like a sentence. The order was given. Prepare the T-5 nuclear torpedo. The projectile was nearly 8 meters long and weighed 2 tons. Its warhead had an estimated yield of 10 kilotons, similar to the bomb that had destroyed Hiroshima. A single shot could vaporize an entire fleet of destroyers, and with it, ignite the chain that would end the world. The officers began the sequence. The safety covers were removed. Technicians adjusted the gyroscopes. Tube number 1 was slowly pressurized. The sound of the mechanism filled the room like a clock counting the seconds to the end. Arkhipov watched in silence. Savitsky's face was undone, his gaze lost between fury and fear. The crew breathed raggedly. Some were shaking. The temperature had exceeded 45 degrees. There was not enough air to think, nor enough space to escape. The sea outside kept roaring. Each detonation shook the ship as if a giant hand were crushing it. The auxiliary reactor was beginning to fail. Electrical systems threatened to shut down. B-59 was now a steel sarcophagus suspended at 200 meters depth, about to release a bomb that would set the sky on fire. Savitsky closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and looked at Arkhipov. "Prepare for launch." At that instant, the fate of the world was reduced to the decision of a single man. Inside B-59, the air was no longer air. It was heat, humidity, and desperation compressed into a steel cylinder. The explosions above kept rumbling, each closer than the last. The oxygen gauges showed critical levels. The lights blinked intermittently, bathing faces in a sickly glow. Captain Savitsky looked at the nuclear torpedo panel. Sweat ran down his forehead, his shirt soaked. Beside him, the political officer Maslenikov nodded in silence. Both were convinced the war had already begun. At that moment, the Soviet chain of command dictated an inflexible rule. Launching a nuclear weapon required the approval of the 3 commanding officers. Savitsky voted yes. Maslenikov voted yes. Only one remained, Vasily Arkhipov. Savitsky stared at him. "They are destroying us, Vasily," he shouted. "It is war. We cannot stay here waiting for them to sink us." Arkhipov kept his voice low, serene but firm. "No, comrade. If it were war, we would already be dead." The silence that followed was unbearable. The sonar's hum, the clanging metal, the ragged breathing. Everything seemed to amplify inside the walls. The men looked at Arkhipov with reddened eyes, awaiting his word as if their fate and everyone else's depended on it. Savitsky struck the panel with his fist. "They are hunting us like animals. We have no communication, no orders. If we are going to die, let them die with us." Arkhipov breathed deeply. The pressure in the compartment was such that every movement hurt. He approached the captain and spoke slowly, weighing each word. "Think, Valentin. If we fire, there will be no return." "There is no return anymore," the captain replied. "Yes, there is. They have not destroyed us yet. We do not know what is happening outside. They may only be warning us." "Warning us with bombs?" "Yes. But we are still alive. That means something." Maslenikov watched them without intervening. He knew that any wrong word could tip the balance toward the end. Arkhipov continued, "I have seen men die from miscalculations, from acting before understanding. If we fire, there will be no mistake to correct. Only silence." Savitsky ran his hand over his face. The heat made him dizzy. He looked at his second-in-command and saw in his eyes the same firmness with which, a year earlier, Arkhipov had kept calm on K-19 while the reactor burned. That calm was now the only thing holding him up. For minutes, no one spoke. Only the metallic groan of the hull resisting the pressure, the sound of valves and the distant detonations. 1 minute, 2, 5. Time turned liquid, like the air that was suffocating them. Finally, Savitsky lowered his head. "All right," he said softly. "Surface. Let us try to contact Moscow." The orders were transmitted slowly. The technicians closed the nuclear torpedo panels and began the ascent maneuver. The reactor barely responded. The secondary generators sparked. The submarine rose centimeter by centimeter, as if the ocean refused to let it go. The men watched the pressure gauges, fearing the hull would not hold. Each meter toward the surface was a victory. Each meter, a risk. After nearly half an hour, sunlight, filtered through the water, began to brighten the portholes. For the first time in days, the men of B-59 breathed fresh air. They had survived. And without knowing it, the world had survived as well. The ascent was slow, almost endless. The propellers of B-59 turned with agonizing effort, dragging the submarine toward the surface through a dense, hot, heavy ocean. The men held their breath. No one spoke. No one moved. Each meter gained was a plea. And then, a different sound filtered among the mechanical noises, the murmur of the open sea. External pressure began to decrease. A bluish-green glow slipped through the cracks. After 5 days of darkness, the light returned. The submarine surfaced slowly, breaking the Caribbean with a muffled roar. Water spilled over the deck, forming white foam that fell like rain. For an instant, only the hiss of steam escaping valves and the moan of exhausted engines could be heard. When the men climbed to the conning tower, the sky blinded them. The sun struck like fire after so many days of dimness. But before their eyes could adjust, they saw what surrounded them. United States destroyers, aligned in a circle less than 1 kilometer away. The American sailors aimed their binoculars at the submarine, unable to believe what they were seeing. They did not know that beneath that blackened structure, a nuclear torpedo had been on the verge of release. The searchlights came on. White beams sliced the air, illuminating B-59 from all angles. The water's surface shone like a mirror. For a few seconds, the scene seemed frozen, the destroyers still, the lights fixed, the sea motionless. Commander Savitsky, still exhausted, ordered an improvised flag waved, a white and red cloth that the sailors hoisted on the main antenna. It was not surrender, it was identification. A silent message. We did not fire. We do not want to. From the United States ships, the observers replied with a brief gesture. The depth charges ceased. The ocean returned to its natural rhythm. The crew of B-59 came out on deck. They breathed open air for the first time in almost a week. Many dropped to their knees, spent. Others stood looking at the horizon in silence, as if trying to understand what had just happened. In the conning tower, Arkhipov remained motionless. The wind struck his face, salty and hot. He looked west, toward where the sun was setting. At that moment, he understood something no speech or document could express. The world had been seconds from disappearing, and no one, except the men of that submarine, would ever know. Around him, the sea seemed calm, indifferent. The waves moved with the same ease as before the crisis, as if the ocean kept no memory of what it had nearly witnessed. But Arkhipov knew. He knew that the balance of history could be broken by a single gesture, a single order, a single click. On a sea without witnesses, a single man stopped the end of the world. While B-59 floated exhausted on the Caribbean surface, the world kept holding its breath. On the surface, the United States destroyers watched, awaiting orders that would never come. At the bottom of the sea, silence returned to its place. Thousands of kilometers away, in Washington, President John F. Kennedy was in the White House Situation Room. The reports were confusing, fragmented. United States radars had detected submarine movements south of Cuba. Warning depth charges had been dropped. No one knew that one of them had been seconds away from provoking a nuclear detonation. National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy reviewed the reports with a furrowed brow. The military insisted the charges were harmless, simple acoustic signals, but neither Kennedy nor his brother Robert were calm. They knew that a single misinterpretation, a single spark, could set the entire planet ablaze. Kennedy murmured something his aides would remember for decades. One mistake, just one, and there will be no one left to tell it. In Moscow, communications with the Caribbean fleet were re-established for the first time in several days. The signals were weak but sufficient. Naval Command confirmed that the submarines were still operational and that none had fired. Tension remained, but the abyss had been avoided. In those same days, the diplomatic channels between Washington and Moscow worked at the limit. Both governments sought a way out that did not imply humiliation or war. The Americans offered to remove their missiles from Turkey in secret if the Soviets removed theirs from Cuba. Khrushchev, pressured by the risk of open conflict, accepted. On October 28th, just 2 days after B-59 surfaced, the crisis officially ended. Soviet ships turned back. The missiles were dismantled. The naval blockade was lifted. The entire planet breathed a sigh of relief. Newspaper headlines proclaimed, "Peace in the Caribbean, historic agreement, war has been avoided." In the streets, people smiled again, unaware that this peace depended on a decision made by a man no one knew, in a place no one watched. Neither Kennedy in the White House nor Khrushchev in the Kremlin knew then how close they had come to disaster. None of the world's leaders knew that the difference between life and total annihilation had been decided in a dark compartment under the sea, amid heat, fear, and silence. While diplomats celebrated the return to normalcy, a Soviet submarine sailed back home. The ocean closed behind it, erasing every trace. No one on the surface would ever know that for a few minutes, the planet's future was in the hands of Vasily Arkhipov. A single man had stopped the end of the world, and the world, without knowing it, had just breathed for the first time. B-59 sailed back toward the North Atlantic in complete silence. The order to withdraw arrived through an encrypted message. The fleet was to leave the Caribbean immediately. The ocean became an unfathomable desert again. The waves covered what had happened as if nothing had occurred. When the submarine reached the naval base at Severomorsk, there was no reception, no anthems, no applause. The men disembarked exhausted, covered in sweat and soot, their faces pale from confinement and lack of air. None of them imagined they had saved the world. Captain Valentin Savitsky was called to Moscow at once. For days, high command officers interrogated him. They wanted to know why he had surfaced, why he had allowed the submarine to be detected, why he had jeopardized a secret operation. The interrogation reports were filed with a single note: failures in stealth and discipline protocol. Vasily Arkhipov, his second in command, was not even mentioned. No one asked him for testimony. No one asked what had really happened inside the submarine. For the Soviet state, what was not acknowledged simply had not existed. B-59 was reassigned, the crew scattered, the story buried. In the newspapers, the news celebrated the diplomatic maturity of the leaders, the political skill of Khrushchev and Kennedy, the peace both had preserved. Official speeches attributed the world's stability to the firmness of governments, the power of socialism, and the balance of capitalism. But no one spoke of the men who spent 5 days trapped under the sea, with air running out and madness on the verge of breaking loose. No one mentioned the officer who, at the decisive moment, had said no. For 40 years, the B-59 incident remained classified. Not even within the Soviet Navy were the details known. The documents were filed under the RE category, Maneuvers in Foreign Waters. Arkipov's name disappeared from public records. Meanwhile, the world went on. New weapons, new conflicts, new generations who grew up without knowing how close humanity had come to extinction. Nuclear submarines continued to sail, missiles kept pointing at the skies, and the ocean's silence preserved the secret. Humanity survived that day, but no one knew it. Years passed, the world changed, empires transformed, and the Cold War ended without an explosion. The Soviet Union ceased to exist, and with it, dissolved millions of secrets kept in silence for decades. Among those secrets slept one that had held up the entire planet. In the year 2002, the Soviet Navy's archives were partially opened. Among the declassified documents were reports of operations in the Caribbean, interrogation notes, and technical records of the submarine B-59. Nothing seemed extraordinary until a group of Russian historians found a terse note written in faded ink. The nuclear launch was not carried out by decision of the second commander, V. Arkhipov. That name, almost forgotten, became a revelation. Testimonies from former officers confirmed the story. Vasily Arkhipov had been the only one of the three commanding officers to refuse authorization to fire the nuclear torpedo on October 27, 1962. A single vote, a single instant of doubt had changed the course of history. Investigations multiplied, journalists, retired military men, and historians reconstructed the events from letters, diaries, and memoirs. The account was clear. If Arkhipov had not been aboard B-59, the decision would have fallen only to Captain Savitsky and political officer Maslenikov. Both would have voted in favor of launch. The torpedo would have destroyed the United States destroyers, and the United States would have responded with nuclear weapons. Within hours, the planet would have been reduced to ashes. Western analysts were blunt. One of them wrote, "If he had not been there, the world would not exist as we know it." In Russia, recognition came late, but it came. Arkhipov was decorated posthumously. His name began to appear in museums, documentaries, and books. In the West, he was mentioned alongside the great heroes of nuclear restraint, men who, amid obedience and madness, chose to think. But Arkhipov never knew the world would call him a hero. He died in 1998, unaware that he had saved billions of people who would never know his face. History, at last, had found him. The 20th century was sustained for a few minutes, and it was the pulse of a single man that decided it would keep beating. The Caribbean Sea is still there, as dark as that night. The waves cover the place where, 60 years ago, the world held its breath. At 200 meters depth, amid heat, noise, and fear, a man chose not to destroy what he could not create. Again, Vasily Arkhipov did not fire. And because of that refusal, everything we know, the story, the cities, the oceans, life itself, continued to exist. Beneath his silent decision lies the bitterest reminder of the 20th century, that humanity had reached a point at which its own extinction was, for the first time, technically possible. The U-2 in the sky, the missiles in the silos, the submarines in the ocean, the satellites watching from space. Each of those machines was a promise and a warning. Human ingenuity could see everything, destroy everything, and, if it was lucky, understand it afterward. Arkhipov understood before anyone what that power meant. He grasped that obedience could end the species, that bravery did not always consist in attacking, and that sometimes the hardest thing was to say no. The Soviets had sent men with orders to destroy, but one of them remembered that we were still human. The ocean kept no record of his decision. There were no witnesses, no cameras, no medals. Only the echo of a heart that chose to wait a few seconds more. Enough for the earth to keep turning. In the Cold War, it was not force that saved the world. It was doubt.